ready to get started this panel? Ready? All right. So today we're here to discuss satellites in action, advancing autonomy, security, and data for a resilient future. I'm Michelle Delvalle. I am the moderator today. I'm CEO of FinSat, a weather intelligence platform focused on development and monitoring and measuring solar assets as well as water and agriculture. I'm ready to introduce the panelists, and I'll let y'all introduce yourselves. This is Christy, Joe, and Christoph, and amazing technologists here in the space sector.
I'm Christy Bradford. I spent the first decade of my career as an instrument systems engineer, which is a very niche area of engineering that specializes in the translation between what scientists need and what engineers should go build. I then realized pretty early in my career that those processes you can apply to any end user besides just scientists. And so I started applying it in a business context of understanding customers and knowing how to build systems that are tied to those, which then led me to work at In-Q-Tel, where I worked very closely with the US government to understand their technology needs, and then went down into the commercial market to invest in the best technology companies to bring into the US government. Since leaving In-Q-Tel, I have been running my own consulting company, working with early stage startups, investors, and government organizations, continuing to basically build the bridge between end users and engineers.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Joe Landon. I'm currently co-founder of a new spacecraft autonomy company. Started my career at Boeing in the commercial satellite business, and then spent about 10 years as an entrepreneur and investor in the commercial space sector. Was co-founder of Space Angels, and then Christy and I actually worked together at a company called Planetary Resources, focused on space resources. Later, I went on to Lockheed Martin, where I was vice president for advanced programs development, managing a portfolio of technology investments for a $1 billion annual portfolio of commercial and civil space business. And I also managed the business development and strategy function for the commercial and civil space business at Lockheed Martin. I left Lockheed to start a company called Crescent Space, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Lockheed, focused on lunar infrastructure. And now, as I mentioned, I've moved on to another startup, just a glutton for punishment, working on spacecraft autonomy. I'm really interested in spacecraft, the space economy in general, human space flight, and robotic space exploration. So hopefully we have time to take questions from the audience on topics like that. Thanks.
Okay. Last but not least, I'm Christoph Wildfeuer. I'm representing academia 90% and 10% company, a small company that's in developing software for satellites. It's called Atellaris, and I'm a professor at the University of Applied Sciences Northwestern Switzerland, that is 20 kilometers off of Zurich. We have a School of Engineering and Environmental Science, and my work is mostly on quantum technologies and satellites. We have projects that are funded by the European Space Agency, for instance, that investigate how to bring end-to-end quantum safe security to satellites. So hopefully I can talk a little bit about this and about my experience together with startups and to try to make the future quantum safe.
Perfect. Well, thank y'all, and thank y'all for being here today. So to frame this conversation, we really want to first just discuss what age and epoch we're in. We're in the age of information, building networks, and that's what satellites do. And so our panel here today are experts in really making it happen, keeping satellites deployed, keeping them in orbit, and there are some interesting technologies that are being used across this panel to make sure data is secured, and we have autonomous systems specifically to focus on in-orbit servicing and focused on specifically making sure we have the right data links down to earth for applications like what we use at FinSat, which is specifically we use a lot of weather data and satellite data for our risk monitoring, and that really helps us focus in on our business cases. So without further ado, I would like to ask Joe a few questions. You have a plethora of expertise, a lot of ventures in space, all the way from lunar infrastructure to asteroid mining to running specifically commercial and national security space missions at Lockheed. So I have a question about operational efficiency and autonomous systems for scaling satellites. We see that satellites are scaling every year. I mean, I think in terms of the leaders, SpaceX and Starlink is actually connecting us in remote regions. So that helps us help the agricultural sector and small remote sections. But I'm curious just to know specifically, how do you make satellites scalable in space? Because if we have a network in space, but nobody's there to actually fix anything, what are your ideas around that? So my specific question is, how are AI and autonomy technologies transforming space operations and enabling entirely new types of missions?
Yeah, so thanks, Michelle. So to address the specific question about how do we use autonomy to scale space operations, I think there's two challenges that need to be met for large constellations of spacecraft. And we're talking about thousands or tens of thousands of spacecraft in a single constellation. So just like all space missions, you have to deal with longer time delays than you do necessarily communicating between terminals on Earth. So in order to respond and to get commands and to respond in a timely fashion, you need to put some of the decision making in space, because you can't be necessarily waiting for those signals to travel back and forth between Earth and space when we're talking about tens of thousands of satellites. You also have to have decision making in place because of the scale. They need to be able to make decisions. They need to be able to coordinate with each other and speak to each other, the satellites. So autonomy plays a role in that. I think there's other opportunities to make new missions where you can have spacecraft operate together as a swarm or as a collective to do missions like very large sensor arrays or very large communications arrays like phased array antennas. Being able to coordinate those types of missions is a really interesting application of autonomy.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting, and I keep coming back to the picture of a blanket and a network. So we all have our phones and just a giant network. So I'm curious, I want to pass it off to Christoph. And in terms of secure data transmission, if you're talking about swarms, and I'm just going to snowball questions, so if I'm wrong, tell me if I'm wrong, but how do you ensure that the downlink communications to Earth, mission operations on Earth, or in space, satellite to satellite, are secure in the next 10 years? Somebody brought up specifically a point of fear for the future about quantum, somebody having the first quantum computer. And I think it's a really good point just to understand true autonomy.
Right. I mean, we heard from the previous speaker from NATO that this is one of their biggest fears, to stay secure when a quantum computer comes about and is able to hack the current encryption algorithms. There's a long answer, and I'd like to try to establish a sense of how complex this is. I mean, if you talk about NATO, and actually there's so many different systems that have to interconnect, that also use different protocols and different software. And in all of them, you have to enable new algorithms that are stronger than the currently used algorithms, like RSA or elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman, key exchange mechanisms. And so you have to, and these satellite constellations, 40,000 plus, everyone has to share a key with everyone. And so if you want to enable end-to-end encryption. This is a big task. So on the one hand, in our project with ESA, we try to investigate public key infrastructure for space missions, because I mean we already use it on the ground very successfully. When you have this client-server application, when you do online banking on all that, why not use the same system in space? But the caveat, the problem is currently that there's all these algorithms, the public key algorithms. Asymmetric cryptography is not supposed to be quantum safe. So you have to actually replace the algorithms with stronger algorithms, which are currently, there's a competition and there's a transition phase to post-quantum cryptography led by the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the US. And there's already some guidelines. And so we basically put in these new algorithms and try to enable public key infrastructure for space. Also, the ground system have to be different, because you mentioned the latencies and all these problems. Also, satellites are actually constrained in size, weight, and power. So you have flying embedded systems, small computers, and these new algorithms, they require quite more computing power and memory. So all that together is quite the task. So I only just heard a number that NSA is requiring the transition to post-quantum cryptography by 2031. So all computers of NSA are supposed to be capable of running the new post-quantum algorithms in 2031. That's on the ground. And well, we also want to go to space with that. And so it's quite the task. And it's actually right now, everyone is working on it. And obviously, I mean, for smaller missions, you have encryption algorithms, symmetric encryption algorithms that are already supposed to be quantum safe. Mm-hmm. But for instance, the advanced encryption standard with a 256-bit key length is supposed to be quantum safe, because symmetric algorithms are not so vulnerable to quantum attacks than the asymmetric algorithms. But this becomes maybe too technical. So there's and then the colleague mentioned about QKD, quantum key distribution, which is a different sort of encryption, which requires a dedicated quantum channel and dedicated hardware. So you cannot run this on standard embedded systems anymore. Yep. You have to have quantum ready hardware that can receive photons and lasers. And so all of that is kind of a complex scenario.
It is complex, and I'm really curious too, because this is like a really great defined use case. And Christy here is a really, really great systems engineer and has really broken apart a lot of these really technical challenges and made them possible. But I'm curious to know your background and expertise, or just with this case scenario. What do you think, and how could you potentially scale this and monetize this? We don't seem like we have a lot of time to get this done, but what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think to both of the points that have already been made by the panelists is when you're talking about constellations of satellites and the coordination across an entire constellation and the secure communication that is needed for that coordination, one of the challenges that you have, whether it's for the company itself or for the investors looking at these companies, is that you're dealing with a highly multidisciplinary problem. Because not only do you need the knowledge of aerospace engineering, you also need quantum knowledge, but you also just need cybersecurity knowledge. And then the RF knowledge if you're using RF, laser knowledge if you're using lasers, but also if you go with something like lasers, you now have attitude determination control problems. Now you need more advanced subsystems on your satellite, and that's just on the space segment. And then you also have complexity on the ground segment, and historically the space sector has been terrible at paying attention to the ground segment. And so it's becoming more and more important for the space sector to pay attention to the ground segment, because the space networks are starting to become directly connected to terrestrial networks. And so that opens up a whole new potential attack surface that these companies need to be thinking about. And so you're dealing with a level of complexity that I think is new both to the space sector itself, but also to the investors that are looking at the sector. And I will say one of the biggest challenges I see across the space sector, albeit it's one that is luckily being addressed, is that things like security are an afterthought. They are not taught as part of space systems engineering. Okay. Instead, you're taught about all these other things you have to think about for a satellite, and then it gets up there, and then it's like, oh yeah, by the way, you need to secure it. And so security of satellites needs to be integrated into how we think about space systems engineering as a whole.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and so I want to frame it in for my business case. So when we talk to insurance companies, there's a big push for smart contracts, and then how do you have security around that? So it really brings this interesting use case for quantum to be interwoven at this stage, but the cost barrier in terms of talent and R&D going into it, who's going to front load that cost? Will it be defense?
Well, based on what I have seen, is a lot of companies are sort of doing the bare minimum from a security perspective just to be able to get government contracts. But honestly, those companies, if they want to get to the point of having programs of record, they're going to have to take their security a lot more seriously. But part of the challenge is that good security is not just a software problem, it's also a hardware problem. And so you can't do it after you've already launched. You got to be dealing with it ahead of time. And so I think we're going to have to see a paradigm shift for a lot of these early stage companies that are launching these satellites to thinking about security a lot earlier if they want to get onto those programs of record.
And it brings an interesting point, especially like from the commercialization perspective. So I know that the U.S. has, from a U.S. perspective, has made a big push to really lean on the commercial sector for fast iteration. And so I want to kind of ask Joe a question in terms of your startup within Lockheed. How did that go? How do you see this kind of cross-section between using defense dollars? I know Dan earlier was talking about specifically, yes, defense really front loads all of the investment costs in R&D, but how do you see that as an avenue, maybe like a systems integrator within big primes?
Yeah, I think defense and space tech companies need to really have a little bit of both worlds, where it's helpful to relevant to the security problem. When we were building the Lockheed subsidiary, it was really helpful to have the entire Lockheed Martin history and knowledge of cybersecurity and compliance with government rules available to us, because a lot of small companies don't have that, and it's a really big challenge and cost to be able to just meet the requirements, which are probably not even adequate, as Christy was saying. But what big companies are looking to do is to innovate faster and be more commercial-like in how fast they can bring technologies to market and how fast they can respond to customer and mission needs. So companies like SpaceX and Anduril are doing a really good job at that. Some of the legacy defense primes are still trying to figure out ways to reinvent themselves so that they can innovate faster.
Okay. I think this lends a really great point to cybersecurity in space. And as we have a load of satellites going up there, what are the challenges across the board do we see in terms of cybersecurity in space? How do we think that using hardware integrated post-quantum structures, and I would love if you really highlighted more on that, because you said that at the tail end there. How will that help? Is the physical hardware key to keeping our network secure and keeping us online?
Yeah. By the way, just a remark. I mean, old satellites usually don't even encrypt the data. They just authenticate the commands, telecommands, and on the other side, all the new, nanosatellites and CubeSats, they can't afford it, and so they also don't encrypt. So there's a big I assume only the big observation satellites from ESA or the US satellites and defense satellites, they can afford decent encryption. And so, yeah, I mean, back to your question, certainly we have some research projects that actually, well, funded by ESA, but then you also like to propose it to defense companies or government and military, which is a little bit tricky because I mean it's public funding from ESA. You must not use this to sell it to defense sector, but I mean we gain knowledge, and the knowledge we can then keep obviously and make something different, not the same, but something different. And yeah, I mean, we develop, for instance, very compact implementations of these new public key algorithms, the quantum safe public key algorithms that run on small embedded systems like FPGAs, that we even make ASICs to support these algorithms that they can execute very quickly and on small hardware and with little amount of energy. So there's maybe you just need a few watts, you know, and so this is our research or my research group that currently works on such systems that then can also be deployed on satellites. So we actually use commercial platforms like from Xilinx. We use FPGAs, small ones that usually used for onboard computers of civilian normal satellites, and then we'll put them on drones and try on high altitude balloons even, and try it out before it goes on a satellite. Yeah. So I mean hardware has an essential role because only with dedicated hardware you reach the performance and the size, weight, and power constraints. You cannot just put one of these new algorithms on a CPU and it just consumes too much power. So you need dedicated hardware for it.
Yeah, just to build on a number of things that you said, 100% agree with everything that was just said, but I will say there has been a push, at least within the US, for more commercial satellite operators to start doing some basic encryption, which is a very good thing for a number of different reasons. And I would say, like, my recommendation to any space company out there is, at a minimum, do AES 256 encryption, and do it not just on your payload data, do it on your tracking, telemetry, and control data as well. Because that's another trend that I have seen, is that some data gets encrypted, but not all data that's going to and from the spacecraft is being encrypted. And these days, everyone should be doing at least AES 256. But that's a near-term solution for the longer-term problem, which is figuring out the post-quantum encryption. But given what you said about NSA preparing for that for 2031, that means it's going to be even longer for the commercial sector to get there. But I think given just the cultural challenge around space cybersecurity that I've seen over the past decade, step one is let's just get some basic encryption in there first, and we can deal with post-quantum encryption once we at least have basic encryption across all satellites.
And one follow-up question there. Do you see an uptick in the commercial sector for ventures in cybersecurity for space?
Well, so that's actually a really interesting question, and it's one that I have worked with cybersecurity colleagues on for a number of years. And I would say the vast majority of cybersecurity challenges in space are not unique to space. So it really is not necessarily going to be dedicated space cybersecurity companies. It's going to be more educating cybersecurity companies on what's unique about space and then how to translate their solutions to space context. And from what I've seen, the best analogy is looking at Internet of Things security. So IoT security has a lot of the same challenges as space security or satellite security. And so a lot of what's been done in terms of cybersecurity around IoT should be portable over into space. And that's really driven by the fact that when you're dealing with satellites or you're dealing with IoT devices, you have limited compute. And so there's certain cybersecurity options that you can use on Earth in large enterprise systems that just doesn't translate to IoT and to space. But what works in IoT is often going to work for space.
And just to make it make sense for me, because I understand IoT networks, but the swarm networks of satellites, can you just think of it the exact same way in terms of connectivity?
I mean, to a certain extent, it depends on sort of the specific networking approaches. But if you think about it as like a mesh network, mesh networks in a terrestrial context are going to have a lot of similarities with a mesh network in a space context. And so it's just a matter of sort of porting that technology and understanding if there are any nuances that need to be addressed.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And talking about hardware, I'm curious to know from Joe, in addition to enabling new missions, how do autonomous in-space assembly for spacecrafts reconfigurability reshape the economics and operational dynamics of space missions, particularly in areas like cost reduction or mission flexibility? And before you answer, it is a really important thing to note that space is a really, really great test bed for efficiency, scalability, only if you are sustainable. I mean, we have redundant systems in space, and it's just a really, really great leader for us and to rework our systems as we evolve with our systems on Earth. So, yeah.
Yeah, so on that, I think there's different types of efficiency, and I think one of the type of efficiency that matters most, or often matters very much in space, are mass efficiency and volume efficiency, because we have to fit everything that we build on Earth into a rocket and then launch it into space. So, in the innovation that my new company is building on is, if we can modularize some or all of spacecraft, we can get better volume efficiency by putting pieces densely stacked, densely packed into a rocket. Even if we have really big rockets, this still helps efficiency. And then when we get to space, we can use those building blocks to assemble larger structures or more complex structures. So we don't have to build something on Earth, fold it up like a piece of origami, fit it into a spacecraft, and then unfold it in space. Let's build spacecraft in more modular fashion so we can build larger and more complex structures that are also, you get, along with that modularity, you get flexibility and resilience. You can reconfigure spacecraft in orbit, and you can recover from failures by swapping out parts or reconfiguring, for a new mission.
It's super interesting. It reminds me, I was at the Luxembourg space. It was a space finance event at the consulate in New York, and there was a company, and I believe it's a Lux company that does satellites. I forget his name. I know his face, but he was talking about this modular structures, honeycomb structure, and using that to build structures in space. And this was, I believe, for building blocks for lunar base or something like that. I mean, but I'm curious to know just an example so we can kind of envision it, because I think sometimes for me, because I'm so downstream from y'all, is just to better understand how it works. Are we talking like an assistant up there that, an attendant that, then you can remote in? I'm kind of curious.
There's different ways to do sort of construction in space. One is to have robotic arms. You can to move things around. You could use propulsive elements, propulsion or thrusters, to move things around and reconfigure things. Or there's other ways to do it as well, using electrostatic forces, electromagnetic forces. So there's ways to move things around in space that we really can't use as effectively on Earth, and we should take advantage of that unique microgravity environment and vacuum environment to try and develop new technologies to do it.
Oh, interesting. Okay, cool. And what challenges did you see with your previous experiences and just colleagues in the industry are having in space? Austin specifically, when I remember that they had what was it, Star Pup got lost in.
Oh, are you talking about Starfish Space?
Yeah, Starfish Space, yeah.
Yeah. So I think you're referring to their Otter Pup mission.
Yeah, their Otter Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and so I will say that they had a major anomaly on that mission, but then did a really masterful job of then recovering from it. But relating
So
that
I'm
back
trying
to what
yeah,
Joe was
that's
just
what I'm trying to
saying,
do, yeah.
one of the most important things for things like reconfigurable satellites, or what Starfish is working on, which is satellite servicing, is the need for rendezvous and proximity operations. And I think that's an area where we're seeing a lot of innovation, and it's probably one of the most exciting areas in the space sector right now. And I think it's going to be a key area from an autonomy perspective, because the more autonomous RPO can become, the lower cost it's going to be for satellite servicing, and the more economically viable it becomes, and then the more proliferated it can become. And I think that's good both from a commercial standpoint, but also potentially from a national security standpoint, albeit it also comes with some challenges from a national security standpoint. But it will, I think, be a paradigm shift in terms of how we think about on-orbit operations and what's really possible in space as these technologies mature. And so Starfish Space is a great example of a company that is solving a software problem, but looks like a hardware company.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, this is a really, really great time that I want to kind of circle in on where we're at today and in terms of connectivity at Davos, and it being a really great point for us to connect from all over the world. And I'm curious just to know from a global space perspective, where do we see each of us going in our domains, in our home countries, but also globally together for the future of space? Like what do y'all want to see, and what do you see in the next 5-10 years? And we'll short term it, yeah.
Well, I could probably talk for about an hour on that.
I know, it's exciting, because this is the whole point. Yeah.
Well, and what I will say is part of the reason it would probably take an hour or longer is that I really think to fully understand where space is headed, we have to not talk about it as a monolith, because there's so many different subsectors within space, and each one of them could just be a panel unto itself.
Yeah.
So I cannot talk about all of them right now, but I will say one of the areas that I am most excited about is the potential for in-space manufacturing, and where I think that is headed. And in particular, there's a number of companies coming online with low-cost down-mass capability, and I think that becomes a real game changer for in-space manufacturing. And when you pair that with what is also happening in commercial space stations, the both human-rated commercial space stations as well as purely robotic space stations, such as what Varda Space is doing, and you combine that then with down-mass capability, the infrastructure is now in place for, I think, a lot more innovation in in-space manufacturing, and I think that's going to be one of the most interesting areas for bringing more non-space companies into really leveraging the benefits of the space environment.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, and I agree with all that. I'll take it a different direction. Talking about global space cooperation, I think a big opportunity that I'm excited about is the Artemis Accords and lunar exploration.
Mm-hmm.
The Artemis Accords is a framework for peaceful and sustainable exploration of the moon. I've actually lost track of how many countries have signed Artemis Accords now, but it's many. I mean, 50 or 60, I think. And it is a way for all nations, big and small, to get involved in the exploration of the moon and later on to Mars as well. And it has been a really successful effort to really coalesce and build an architecture where all different countries and global actors of different capabilities and different maturity in their space programs can play a role.
But what do you see it looking like on the moon? Like envisioning it, and like where, in terms of architecture, what would it look like? Like I know specifically Dan's company is going to have gas stations, the next big oil company. But what would it look like?
Yeah, I think at first
Excited.
what we saw this year was the first commercial lunar landing, and it was a NASA program to buy commercial service of cargo delivery to the moon. So like it's starting there. And the focus of the Artemis program is on the South Pole, because there's water resource there at the South Pole,
Mm-hmm.
which the reason that it's you can use water to sustain human exploration and to create and fuel for gas stations on the moon to enable exploration of the moon and also farther into the solar system.
I also just have to add to that. I think eventually what the moon will look like
Yeah?
is Las Vegas.
No, no. Okay, then I'm not going.
Oh no, I have a whole analogy I've developed over the past few years. My hometown, I live in Las Vegas. My hometown is Las Vegas. It is a great misunderstood city. But I will just say the three markets that made Las Vegas the city it is today: civil government funding, national security government funding, and tourism. And resources. What are the markets that are likely going to emerge on the moon? Same markets.
Same markets.
So I think we will be building Las Vegas on the moon.
Hot take.
I can add to that. So I was asked about contributing in a phase zero study from ESA to put Wi-Fi on the moon in a quantum safe way. so basically the astronauts need Wi-Fi, right? And you would send maybe the the data with optical links, optical backhaul links, so a combination from optical communication and Wi-Fi. So I think I can support that. I can see that there's some habitats and some shows going on and Wi-Fi of course. Yeah. So I can add to the perspective of Switzerland actually in this sector. So Switzerland has a lot of small and medium-sized companies that contribute in the space sector, and I mean we have very strong universities like University of Bern that provides actually provided. I heard the first experiment for the first moon landing. They had some kind of particle experiment, so that was actually deployed even before the American flag. So I mean, Switzerland is kind of very engaged in these missions, worldwide missions. But on the other hand, Switzerland is too small to do it by themselves. So we have strong contribution with ESA. So also Switzerland is not in the EU, but it's a contributor, a strong contributor to ESA, and so we have all the space missions are usually kind of ESA missions, larger ESA missions, and Switzerland is very strong in cryptography. So we have this crypto valley in Zug, so a lot of blockchain companies there. And so also companies that provide encryption services for government and military. I think some of you might have heard about some things in the past, not too good things about, but well, Switzerland had its fair share of scandals about cryptography. So they sold encryption devices to some countries that are not so friendly, and put in backdoors in collaboration with the US. So anyway, so I don't expand on that here, but to summarize, I think the space sector, Switzerland provides very good infrastructure for space companies, but we have not very much public funding for that. So it's venture capital is almost non-existing from my point of view. It's very hard to get, and so my funding only comes from public funding from organizations like EU Horizon, ESA, or the Swiss National Fund and all that. And that is obviously public funding that you cannot spend or you shouldn't get too much into dual use.
Well, maybe there's a deal to be made with Orbit Fab. Maybe you could create a crypto currency transactions for gas station on the moon. I'm just kidding, but I want to open it up to questions, and we have time for like a couple questions. Does anybody have questions for our panelists?
Okay, I'll go first.
Okay.
Another beautiful friend is, how do we feed? Here we go. Wonderful panel. I have to be so proud of you as, first of all, being a friend of mine, but that's, spatially empowered is the question. So When we look at the human organism and the gut biome and then the food and the ability to thrive on the moon, so my question is, how do we optimize that, and what are some of the lessons that you predict and could be beneficial for us from the moon back down? So that's number one. Number two, I know that through some of the work that I was doing in the Middle East, that we also have some opportunity of some technology that can innovate and activate building energy from the moon that would be beneficial back down here on Earth. So is there any insights about sort of that duality? Instead of us thinking we're going, it's also how is it going to give us something back? Thank you.
I'll take that one first. So a thought experiment that I do all the time is I think of just a random thing we do on Earth, and then I add in space to the end of it, and then I think through what it would take to do that thing in space. What I have found is basically every time I do that, if I then go do a Google search of that afterwards, someone has already thought about it. And so things like agriculture in space, food in space, there's already a ton of research that's been done. I mean, there's things out there like how to design coffee cups for drinking coffee in space. And so I actually would say that when it comes to the intersection of sort of bio writ large in space, there's so much potential, both in terms of adapting what we already do on Earth for use in space, but also just in terms of medical research that is happening in space that then allows us to inform and increase our understanding of the human body and microbiomes and how the space environment can change the interactions there. And so I personally super supportive and bullish on more bio-related research in space, because it's something that not only can help us long term with the expansion into space as humanity, but it also helps us understand how we work on Earth and how we can really better understand Earth. And so I will say, when I think about sort of space investment writ large, my thesis looks way beyond traditional space companies, and I do investments into biomedical companies as well, because pretty much every biomedical company has some sort of connection to space. If some of them just don't know it yet.
Thank you. I agree very much. Anybody else with a question? Space ZZ.
I just want to add to that. I am a biomedical engineer by training, and I think it is it is something, unless we only want robots on the moon, which fine, cool, no Vegas, but no Vegas. But if we want people there, I have a really good friend. His name's Grant Anderson from Paragon Space, and he was talking about, we talk shop a lot about biomedical phenomena in space, and you need the data. I mean, come on, how many astronauts have been, Joe, how many astronauts have been in space? You would know the answer to this on this panel, but the data's not there. You need to put sensors and have a way to collect as much data when they're up in orbit. Our bodies, in terms of microbiomes, are very, very dependent on your surroundings, which impact your epigenetic factors. I mean, just coming here to Switzerland, I mean, my lips are dry, my hair is dry. I was a little stressed out because this is a very important conference. So, my cortisol levels are high. I'm hyper adrenaline. And that all impacts my microbiome. So in space, a complete stressed environment, you're going to have changes not only to your epigenetics, that'll impact your genetics and then your future generation. So that is something that needs to be studied and tested rapidly in space, and through all this age of information, collecting data, we can do it. But I want to see that happen more. But Axiom's doing some cool stuff. Anybody else have any questions? Yeah?
Yeah, I already have a mic.
Oh,
I actually
you
got
want to sit here?
No.
Just to let everyone know, we can only take one more question just because we're doing on time.
Yeah, thanks.
Mario Vianello, Mountain X, Dual Use Defense and Aerospace VC Fund. A short comment and a question. We as a VC fund, we see the need for a space technology to be, if as possible, debugged on the Earth. So the company is working on colonization of the Mars. Before spending $150 million and just finding out it doesn't work, we would prefer them to do something on Earth, at least as a source of revenue, at least to pay the electricity in the meantime, before really go to Mars, which is fine. So, question. My view on that is that European Space Agency, NASA, Italian Space Agency, and so on, should be working more on ideas and a proof of concept. For example, what you mentioned, monitoring of humans in space, because there is no commercial value as of today for that. While the commercial companies should be working on implementation that will bring to immediate commercialization. For example, flying to space molecules in order to have the growth for formulas for biopharma industries. There's a commercial demand for that. So I honestly don't see a reason why European Space Agency should finance those kind of projects when there is a commercial demand for this. So I'm curious, what do you think about this split between, public spending versus commercial spending, including startup scale-ups or even bigger companies? Thanks.
Yeah, just a quick answer. I think you're right. The balance is, government funding is limited and scarce, so it needs to go to activities that push the state of the art and aren't commercially viable yet, but with a view towards enabling commercial investment later. So I think that's the right framework to think about it.
Yeah, I would just add to that anything that's basic research, government should be funding. Anything that's development, commercial should be funding. Anything that's applied research, kind of a gray area, and so you're going to have a little bit of a mix of both. But I do think that it's, specifically with companies where there's terrestrial applications and space applications, I think it's really important that a lot of these space companies actually stop and think about the terrestrial applications. And in fact, the advice I give to every startup that I advise in the space sector is don't brand yourself as a space company. And part of that is because their technology is absolutely applicable to other things besides space.
It's actually so true. I started out as a space company, and I don't brand myself as a space company unless I'm with my space colleagues. But it's super true. If you want Vegas to happen on the moon, you need to look at Earth as a template and kind of see how we interact with each other, how we build things, and make it relevant to people. We deal with the real estate and specifically insurance companies, but they use space technology just like everybody else does here today with your phones. So thank you all so much for this lovely panel and for being here. And yeah, we're ready for questions. We'll take it outside. Thanks.